Hi there and welcome back. So how did you do combining your food strategically using the Magic Healing formula? It's pretty easy, isn't it? And the good news is that's really as complicated as healthy eating gets, which means healthy eating is pretty darn simple. Now we're going a layer deeper to talk about crossover foods, what they are and why they matter. Now that you're using the Magic Healing formula to create low glycemic meals that heal and energize, it's important to know that the carb you're eating may also have some protein, and the protein you're eating may have some fat, and that the fat that you're eating may have some protein or some carbs or both. This is because no food except for pure oil contains just one macronutrient. However, for many foods, one macronutrient may overwhelmingly dominate. For example, an apple actually has a minuscule amount of protein and fat, but it's such a tiny amount that it won't make any difference in the glycemic level or balance of your meals and snacks. And because of this, we classify an apple as a carb. Along the same lines, butter actually has a smidgen's worth of carb and protein. But again, it's such a minuscule amount that it won't make any difference in the glycemic level or balance of your meals. And because of this, we classify butter as a fat. But other foods have a lot more than a smidgen's worth of a second macronutrient, and that amount will make a difference in the glycemic level and the balance of your meals and snacks. Some foods have a proportionally significant amount of a second and in rare cases a third macronutrient. I call these foods crossover foods because, quite simply, they cross over more than one macronutrient. For example, we learned in our class on protein that eggs are a protein source, but eggs also have a proportionally significant amount of fat, and this makes eggs a protein-fat crossover food. So when you're using the Magic Healing formula, you would certainly count eggs as your protein source, but what about the fat in the eggs? The fat is proportionally significant, so you need to factor it in because you may or may not need to add more fat to your meal. And this makes protein the primary macronutrient for eggs and fat the secondary macronutrient for eggs. Along the same lines, we learned in our class on carbs that legumes are a carb source. But legumes also have a proportionally significant amount of protein, and this makes legumes a carb-protein crossover food. So when you're using the Magic Healing formula, you would count legumes as your carb source, but you also need to keep in mind that the protein is proportionally significant, and because of this, you may or may not need to add more protein to your meal. And this makes carbs the primary macronutrient for legumes and protein the secondary macronutrient. When you start using the Portions app, the app will automatically account for all crossover effects. Most foods are crossover foods to some extent, but it's very useful to know the short list of foods that have significant crossover effects. So let's take a look at that list. First, we've got two categories of fat-protein crossover foods: nuts, seeds, and peanuts, which we learned are a legume that behaves like a nut, and cheese. Then we've got four categories of protein-fat crossover foods: meat, most poultry, and most fish. And I say most because some poultry and fish are virtually fat-free. So let's be clear that there are always exceptions, as in life, right? Then we've got cottage cheese, eggs, and soy foods. Next, we actually have one category that's a triple crossover food, and that's milk, yogurt, and kefir. These foods are all protein-fat crossover foods, but because of their lactose content, they also provide proportionally significant carbs. So they're really a protein-fat-carb crossover food. Notice that cottage cheese is not in this category, and that's because, unlike its dairy cousins, it's virtually carb-free. In this respect, it's almost like a milk cheese hybrid. It has the protein of milk, but like cheese, it has virtually zero carbs. Finally, we've got one category of carb-protein crossover food, and that's legumes, which we just talked about. So these are the significant crossover foods. But remember, when you start using the Portions app, you'll see smaller crossover effects from other foods. For example, grains. All grains have protein, but the protein content isn't quite proportionally significant enough for me to consider it a major crossover food. But you'll certainly see some of your protein portion fill in when you eat a grain and record it in the Portions app. Let's look at some examples of how you would create strategic meals using the Magic Healing formula and keeping in mind the effects of crossover foods. Let's start with a yummy turkey sandwich. Let's use 2 slices of whole grain bread with some tomato and spinach for some high quality, nutrient-dense carbs. Then we'll add 3 slices of naturally raised turkey breast for some quality protein, and we'll finish it off with some cheese and mayonnaise. For the mayonnaise, I'm of course talking about mayonnaise made with quality oil, no soybean or canola oil. Look for one made with olive oil, or make your own if you're a die-hard mayo fan. It's one of the easiest things to make. Now let's add the crossover effects. We also get protein from the cheese as well as some protein from the bread. Now let's look at one of my favorite snacks, a cheese and avocado tostada. This has incredible staying power and it's so yummy. For our carbs, let's use 2 corn tortillas and some salsa, plus 1½ cups of diced veggies on the side. Cucumber and peppers are 2 of my favorites, but choose something else if you have your own favorites. Now let's add some shredded cheese and sliced avocado for quality sources of saturated and monounsaturated fats. Notice that for this meal I don't use a protein source, and that's because of the crossover effects. We get protein from the cheese as well as some protein from the tortillas. And the combined protein in the cheese and tortillas adds up to about a portion of protein using the Portions app, and that's quite enough for me for a snack. Now let's look at a dinner example. Baked salmon, another one of my favorites that's so easy to prepare. It has to be easy for me to make it, so any recipes I show you are guaranteed to be easy. When I'm in the kitchen, the only word that matters, next to quality of course, is easy. So let's use roasted potatoes and sauteed veggies for a great variety of higher and lower carb veggies. The salmon is the protein source, and the butter and olive oil are quality sources of saturated and monounsaturated fat. I include the olive oil because I use about 2 teaspoons of olive oil in total to coat the salmon before I bake it and the potatoes before they're roasted. And since fats are dense, 2 teaspoons makes a difference. In fact, 2 teaspoons of any pure oil equal a portion of fat in the Portions app. I'll also get other fat from the salmon. Okay, one last time, let me share with you my all-time favorite snack, cottage cheese with watermelon and walnuts. The watermelon is a sweet, delicious source of carbs. The cottage cheese provides the protein, and the walnuts are a healthy source of omega-6 fat. But I'll also get some protein from the nuts and some fat from the cottage cheese. Well, congratulations, you've just finished Proper Balance. Now you know about the Magic Healing Formula and you know about crossover foods. It's time now to move on to portions because a lot of people ask me, just how much of what should I be eating? A very good question, and this class will tell you that. And it will introduce you to the Portions app so you can start using it. For your action items, just continue following all food quality principles and combining your food strategically using the Magic Healing Formula, but now be conscious of the impact of crossover foods in your meals. So for example, whatever meat you're having will provide some fat, unless of course you're having skinless turkey or chicken breast, so you may or may not have to add any other fat. If you have a yogurt, be aware that you're also getting fat and some carbs from the lactose. And this means you'll want to add a smaller quantity of fruit to the yogurt if you're a fruit and yogurt fan. And that's it this time around. Great job, as always. I'll see you soon to start our discussion on portions. Cheers!